Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Vault. Jersey Joe Archino back here. And there's no question that kind of in our society right now, race has been a hot topic button issue, whether it's in regards to the Oscars or now in sports. It's kind of delved a little bit everywhere. And I think overall, we're really becoming more divided as a society now. I mean, every single thing we try to separate and make things a race issue. Sometimes I think it's overblown. Sometimes, of course, it has merits. But of course, with the Super Bowl coming up, Cam Newton saying some words the other day that got a lot of people talking. And clearly, I think it's always interesting to have conversations about this. And basically, what he said, I'll give you his words. I've said it since day one. I'm an African American quarterback. That may scare a lot of people because they haven't seen nothing that they can compare me to. Oftentimes it's funny. I get inspired. It makes me get out there and practice even harder because I remember when I was working out for the draft and I would see, and it goes a little bit on, but I think the bottom line is boiled down to those first couple lines. And part of I think is I think you can't forget about the guys like Warren Moon. I think you look at Warren Moon as kind of the guy who broke the barrier for African American quarterbacks because let's never forget he had to kind of go into the Canadian Football League and before he really got his legitimate chance in the NFL. And of course, Warren Moon was one of the most talented quarterbacks we've seen in NFL history. I mean, the guy put up incredible numbers in the CFL. Then he comes over to the NFL, and he does what he would have been doing there all along. Led the Houston Oilers, one of the most high-powered offenses in NFL history. Warren Moon was a tremendous quarterback. And look, I think Cam saying something like this, I think sometimes you have to think because people have seen this before. Warren Moon is kind of the guy who broke the barrier, and I think you kind of have to pay respect to him in some regards. And then even he said, I think at its core, this comes down to kind of the line he says here, where he says, they haven't seen nothing they can compare me to. But I think Warren Moon clearly is the first guy who kind of set things up. Now, Doug Williams was not a great quarterback. He just wasn't. But he won the Super Bowl performance. He kind of took over that season and played terrific. Outside of that Super Bowl run, he didn't do anything significant in his NFL career. But during that season stretch where he led them to beat the Broncos in the Super Bowl, he did some special things. Russell Wilson, let's not forget about Russell Wilson, what he's done in this league. I think Russell Wilson and Cam Newton are going to be the two of the guys who are going to be constantly facing off against one another these next couple of years. I think in sports, we always see different eras of rivalries coming up, and I think the Russell Wilson Cam Newton rivalry era is kind of on the horizon. We kind of saw it and we've seen it building. It kind of came into fruition with their playoff matchup we saw this season, and now I think it's going to continue to grow and build. But you can't forget about the guys who kind of helped done things before, and I think look, sometimes Cam, some of the stuff is overblown. I think what it boils down to is you can never forget about how he acted when he came into the NFL. Let's be honest, he lacked maturity. That's the bottom line. He was a fantastic player, but the way he handled himself in press conferences, the way he had his composure on the field, he lacked certain maturity. There's no denying that. But while recognizing that, you always have to recognize the growth in his maturity this season. Cam Newton really did a good job being more composed in his press conferences, not being a downer when things weren't going his way on the field. He certainly growed from a maturity standpoint. And look, he likes to celebrate on the field. He likes to do things like that. I think sometimes that stuff is a little bit overblown. Sometimes, look, I'm more of a subscriber into the Barry Sanders philosophy where if you've been there and you expect to be back there, you don't need to celebrate. But look, it's the NFL. This is sports today. This is what happens. I don't think that stuff should really be overblown that much. But I think at its core with this situation is you have to recognize that Cam did lack maturity, did lack composure early in his career, even though the play I thought was always terrific. But you always have to recognize he grew tremendously from a maturity standpoint and from a composure standpoint. But as we move on a little bit more away from this, I think at its core, where we get these words from, where he said they haven't seen nothing they can compare me to, trying to separate himself in that regard, I still think you always have to be very careful because there have been people who kind of did have to fight that battle. Warren Moon was really the one I think deserves the testament for fighting that battle and kind of getting that starting point ready. And I think for that reason, Cam's words might have been better constructed if he had kind of said things. I don't know, he wears the number of the guy Warren Moon, and I know the two of them have had somewhat of a relationship based on what we've read and what we've heard. So I think again, you look back at Cam's track past a little bit, and then he deserves some credit for what he's done in the growth department. And then I think you also have to look back and say he needed to mature, and he did. And certainly, as we move closer and closer to the Super Bowl, I think we'll get closer to the actual game because I don't enjoy talking about this much stuff as we do with the game, and the game will be here very soon, of course, with the picks, with the predictions, kind of boiling down the matchup. I mean, I've been really saying it more and more as I've been on throughout the week is I'm leaning more and more towards the Panthers. Now, I think it's interesting dynamic because the Broncos come into this game, of course, with the number one ranked defense, and clearly that has made a difference in the Super Bowl these last couple of seasons. But I think Carolina's defense is just as good, and they have the dominant factors at the key positions at linebacker. They have a corner. They have a pass rush. They have, obviously, Cam Newton has been the best quarterback in the league this season. They have so many things going for them, but we will save that talk for a little bit later in the week as we move closer and closer to Super Bowl 50. But until then, Jersey Joe Archino here with the Sports Vault. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe Archino, on Instagram, Jersey_Joe_Archino, and I'll be back very soon.